Meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals for the City of Troy for April 16th to order. Before we call the roll, I'll just read some simple procedures that we have for citizens who may choose to participate tonight in this meeting. The Board of Zoning Appeals is a group of 7 of your neighbors or peers appointed by Troy City Council to pass judgment on requests for variances and other matters that are brought before them. A variance is a relaxation of the literal provisions of the zoning ordinance. Petitioners must indicate a hardship or practical difficulty running with the land that would warrant the granting of the variance. The board will hear the items in the order they appear on the agenda. When an item is called, the chairman will verify that the petitioner is present, then the city administration will summarize the facts of the case. The petitioner will then be given an opportunity to address the board to explain the justification for the action requested. After the petitioner makes their presentation and answers any questions that the board may have, the chairman will open the public hearing. Any person wishing to speak on the request should raise their hand, and when recognized by the chairman, come to the podium before us. The speaker should identify themselves with name and address, indicate their relationship to the property in question, i.e. next door neighbor, live behind the property, etc. State whether they are in favor of or against the variance request and give reasons for their opinion. Comments must be directed through the chairman. Comments should be kept as brief as possible and closely pertinent to the matter under consideration. Only one person will be recognized by the chairman to speak at one time. At the conclusion of public comments, the chairman will close the public hearing. Once the public hearing is closed, no other public comment will be taken unless in response to a specific question by a member of this board. The board will then make a motion to approve, deny, or table, which is a delaying of the action for the request. In order for the request to pass, a minimum of 4 votes for approval are needed. If the request is not granted, the applicant has the right to appeal the board's decision to Oakland County Circuit Court. Mr. Evans, can we have the roll, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bloomingdale.
Here.
Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Courtney.
Here.
Mr. Kaltsunis.
Here.
Mr. Krent.
Here.
Mr. Lambert.
Here.
Mr. Neal. Absent.
Well, we do have quorum for tonight, and on behalf of the Zoning Board of Appeals, I'd just like to mention that we do have some new additions, or somewhat new faces to the board. And Troy City Council took action last night and made several appointments, and I think it's appropriate to congratulate Mr. Bloomingdale to my right. He was an alternate on the board, and he was elevated to a full member position on this board. So he participated with the board before, but now he will be a regular member of this body. And then former Troy Councilman David Eisenbacher was appointed to the position of full member as well. I spoke to Mr. Eisenbacher briefly by email today, and he told me that he was out of town for business, so I'm sure he hasn't even taken the oath of office. He's out of state, I understand. And Mr. Krent is now rotated in from the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has one of their members who sit on this board as a liaison, and that position is an annual rotation. So Mr. Krent is now joining us, I believe, for the first time since his time on the Planning Commission. So he himself is also a full member of this board for the next year and a full member of the Troy Planning Commission. And of course, Mr. Kaltsunis is an alternate with the Zoning Board of Appeals, and he is sitting in for a member tonight that was not able to be here. So thank you for your participation as well. And I think that's it. Okay, so having said that, we can now move on with the consideration of the minutes. Is there a motion?
I would move that the minutes be approved. Support. This is for November, or I'm sorry, for January.
Correct.
But Mr. Chairman, when the time comes, I'd like to talk about the minutes for November.
Okay, sure. So moved by Bloomingdale, seconded by Courtney. Is there any discussion on the minutes? On the motion, I should say. Hearing none, I believe, Mr. Evans, we're ready for a vote.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Courtney.
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
I'm going to abstain, I wasn't here.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale.
Yes.
Okay, I believe that that's approved, but Mr. Evans, or maybe the city attorney can address this. An abstention, I believe we have an issue in the rules on that. Is that correct?
rule specifically applying to abstention?
Or a member to abstain if there's not like a conflict? I'm just trying to clarify, because I believe we covered this ground a long time ago, and it's a little hazy. I'm not saying that Mr. Crenton
No,
made,
and anybody on the board can make a decision on approval of the minutes, whether they were at the meeting or not.
Okay.
You don't, if you're absent from a meeting, you can still approve the minutes. That's appropriate.
okay.
Is that what you were?
Yes,
Mr.
but
Chair? Okay.
the vote has already been taken, and a member of this board moved or voted to abstain. Is an abstention a acceptable vote based on our rules for this body? I'm just trying to clarify. I understand that he chose not to. I'm just trying to say what the practical impact is here.
Since the minutes were approved, I don't believe there is any
Okay.
practical impact.
I understand. Okay. We've had a number of different assistant city attorneys servicing this body over the years as legal counsel, so I may have remember speaking to another one of our the staff from the legal department. Okay, thank you very much for clarification. Having said that, I believe if Mr. Bloomingdale has a comment, Mr. Evans, would that be more appropriate during the public comment section towards the end?
Yeah, I think we should wait till the end to
Okay,
follow the order
very
of the
good.
agenda if it's acceptable.
Thank you very much. And now we can talk about the item 3, which is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to be made by a member?
I'll approve it.
Mr. Krent moves for approval. Mr. Lambert seconds.
Mr. Chairman, there's actually no need for a motion on this generally. It's just unless someone wants to change the agenda.
Oh, I
So
see.
Just, it stands as presented unless there's a motion to amend it. So that's why I didn't second his motion.
I believe that's what I recall, but it says on our information in front of me that says approval of agenda. So, Mr. Evans, can you address that?
Well, I really have nothing different to say than what Mr. Lambert said. He is correct.
So unless somebody wants to make a motion to change it, then it stands as is. Okay, very
Right,
good.
right.
And we can move into item 4, the hearing of the case. I would like to make a comment to the petitioner related to this item that we are not a full board tonight. There is one person who is absent from tonight's meeting, and there is not a right, but a request that the board can consider if the petitioner is interested in postponing this item until there's a time when there's a full board. There's never a guarantee of a full board based on illness and travel and last-minute travel, but that is something that the petitioner can request, and it's a simple postponement to the next month's meeting. And we have, just for your full knowledge, we have been missing monthly meetings for lack of business, but that wouldn't be the case in this situation, correct, Mr. Evans? Because we would just be a simple postponement until the very next month.
Right, if we adjourn this to a date certain, we would hold that meeting.
So, if the petitioner is interested in requesting a postponement, please come to the podium and identify yourself and make your comment of request. Okay, very good. So we are then moving forward, and related to item 4, the variance request related to John Werness, United Ventures 2 LLC, regarding a vacant property on Birchwood between 1825 and 1871 Birchwood, tax parcel identification number 20-26-478-033. Mr. Evans, do you have information to present to the board?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This property is located in a neighborhood north of East Maple Road and west of John R. Road. On the presentation, it is the rectangular red square. And the property is an unimproved site, I should say a property without buildings. There are some improvements located between 1825 and 1871 Birchwood. The subject property and all surrounding properties are zoned integrated industrial business. The applicant has provided some snapshots of the site from the street. And this is a copy of their site plan that was received by the Planning Commission as part of their special land use request to have a contractor's yard with outdoor storage. Because a variance is necessary, one of the conditions is that there be that the outdoor storage be accessory to the contractor's principal's office use on the property, which means they have to have a permanent building that houses an office. So the Planning Commission has received this special use request and site plan, but by ordinance, because a variance is needed, they cannot act upon it until the disposition of the variance. And that matter was received by the Planning Commission on March 26th, upon which they postponed the matter until this board took action. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Does the board, members of the board have questions? Mr. Courtney?
Yes. From reading, I understand that this is being leased, and I'm wondering, is the owner of the property any of the abutting parcels?
I don't know.
Perhaps the petitioner can give greater clarity on that. Mr. Bloomingdale, did you have a question?
Yes, there's a letter from United Ventures, just a second page, item 4 says that the section 6.08-B requires the site to be enclosed by an 8-foot fence. The site plan indicates only a 6-foot fence to be provided. Do we have a conflict there?
No, I don't think we have a conflict. Certainly, this is a special land use request, and the ordinance language says technically up to 8 feet. So really, that is the standard that they need to meet, and it would be up to the Planning Commission to determine what height of fence would be appropriate for this kind of use.
That was a similar question I was going to have regarding the height and so forth, and it's good to know that the Planning Commission would work out the details in that regard. If we, is that correct, Mr. Evans? If we approve the variance, then it goes to the Planning Commission for those details to be worked out, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lambert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Evans, though, and this probably would go to either you or Mr. Motstay, or maybe even Mr. Krent. I'm not sure if he was on Planning Commission at the time when this was adopted, but the letter from Mr. Carlisle refers to the fact that, I guess the sticking point in this whole issue is the existence of some type of a contractor's office on the site. Do you know as to the reason why this was inserted in the 2011 rewrite of the zoning ordinance? Was there a particular reason that motivated the Planning Commission to make that change?
I don't know what the reason is.
I don't know if Mr. Krent was on there at the time or not, so, okay. I guess we can hash that out then when it comes back to us.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Krent?
I had a question for the staff. This is a use variance as opposed to a dimensional variance, correct or not?
No, this is not a use variance.
Okay. This is a dimensional variance then? Or not?
We've had a discussion on that issue between the planning consultant, the city attorney's office, and city administration, and the response we have is the administration's position that this should be treated as a non-use dimensional variance. Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions of our city staff before we call the petitioner forward? Seeing none, if the petitioner could come forward, if you have somebody to assist you or give further information, please ask that person to come forward. Please identify yourself, and of course you heard the request for your connection to the parcel.
Absolutely. My name is John Wernes. I'm the managing member and owner of United Ventures 2 LLC. I do have a couple partners, Sam Lagrasso and James Carabelli. Also, I'm the president and owner of a landscape company called United Lawnscape. Leasing the property would be, I would be leasing the property to our landscape company, which we have in existence in many different locations throughout our landscaping locations. So,
Okay.
for clarification on that.
Nathan Robinson with Horizon Engineering. I would just like to address If I could briefly, the variance review standards, I'm assuming everybody's had a chance to review my letter, and I also included, for your benefit, the letter that was submitted to for the site plan purposes to the Planning Commission. And I think between the two letters, it not only explains the project and the intent of Mr. Warnes, but also the variance request. But if I can speak towards the 5 variance review standards, the 2 primary items, and this is, again, ordinance section 15.04E2. Items A and E are probably the most important, so I'll speak most about those, and items B, C, and D are, I'll speak about those 3 first because they're the shortest ones. Item B is with regards to the, obviously this variance request is related to this property, not another property. Item C, this is, and I'll get into it in more detail, this really isn't a variance request of a personal nature. I think this variance request would apply to anybody that would look towards development and or use of this property. Item D is obviously this, as it relates to the shape and the size of the parcel, it wasn't created by the applicant. This property has been in existence, is a part of an original platted subdivision lot that has been pretty much that size and shape for many years. But I want to get into more detail on items A and C. Item A, with regards to the characteristics of the property and as it relates to having a permanent structure, this is obviously a small piece of property. It's narrow and long. And being 60 feet wide, it presents some difficulty for anybody that would look towards putting in a building to develop a piece of property for whatever purpose they may see fit in the IB district. If a building was constructed on this property, it would need to maintain a minimum side setback of 10 feet. You would also, that's on one side of the building. On the other side of the building, you would need to maintain a minimum of 24 feet for a 2-way driveway to access the rear of the property. So that's 34 feet automatically taken out of the width. Generally, this probably isn't a complete necessity, but in my line of work doing this, you would generally have a 5-foot sidewalk minimally between your driveway and your building for safe pedestrian circulation, as well as if there were door openings, you would want some space there between the traffic and the door swing. So you effectively reduce your buildable width to 21 feet. Now, yes, you could build a building in 21 feet. Is it practical? Is it realistic that somebody would purchase this property, tear up half of the asphalt that's already there, to construct a building, to run sewer and water to a building, to run drainage facilities, and on top of that, they would have to create a parking lot. Anytime you have a permanent structure, essentially that's not only for the purposes of the people that built the structure, but it's so that the public can, be there, whether it's a retail facility or what have you. There's going to have to be barrier-free parking. There's going to have to be standard spaces, whatever the minimal parking requirements are to satisfy the ordinance requirements, and it goes on from there. Curbed landscape islands. As soon as you have a parking lot, you have to have minimum amount of landscape space, open space, landscape plantings to satisfy the parking lot tree requirement. So you would essentially take this property, which for Mr. Warnes' purposes is 100% usable, and I would imagine half of that space would be X'd out to construct a building that he doesn't even need to satisfy the ordinance requirements. And you'd be left with the rear portion that certainly wouldn't serve his purposes. It would severely restrict him or any other potential user to park the vehicles on site and to maneuver on site. So in all matter of practicality, whether this is the IB district or commercial or office or even a residential district for that matter, I don't see anybody ever constructing a building that's 21 feet wide. You could, maybe if you're doing a trailer home development, but there's some debate whether or not that's even a permanent structure. So I think that applies not only to Mr. Warnes' proposed use, but really anybody that may look towards redeveloping the site. Item E, with respect to the character of the IB district and the neighborhood, I feel it's very important to realize that over the past 30 years, this property has functioned for pretty much exactly what Mr. Warnes proposes to do here, is to park vehicles. This property was granted special use approval 30 years ago in 1982 to park vehicles. and that's essentially what he's proposing to do. Now, granted, back in 1982, they were, for whatever reason, only approved 6 vehicles, but when you look at the aerial photos, when you look at the history, in reality, they parked in excess of 20 vehicles at any given time on this property in plain view of anybody driving up and down Birchwood Street. This property is only partially screened. So, and you can see from the photos, or if you've been to the site, all these vehicles were in plain view of the public. And it persisted for 30 years without, to our knowledge, any issues. For that to basically continue for his purposes for another 30 years, I can't see there, if it worked for the last 30 years, I can't see why it wouldn't work for another 30 years. The biggest difference being that he is certainly going to put up the proper screening. There's some questions as far as the height of the fence, and I think we're actually probably going to propose an 8-foot high fence, but along with the fence, to finish the enclosure, it's going to be screened. It's not going to be as fence, there's going to be slats, there's going to be some opacity there, so that the vehicles that are parked on site, they'll be shielded from view of the public. So in addition, there was some landscaping that's being provided as well. So we feel that it's an overall improvement, if anything, to the site, and the use is very similar to what's been documented more or less on site for the last 30 years. And it's harmonious with the neighborhood and the IB district. So I'd be happy to go into any further detail into any of those items or anything in my letter, or if anybody has any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Courtney.
Yeah, I'm just curious, in your letter on the first page on the last paragraph, you say, Section 608 implies. I have trouble understanding how shall means implies. The ordinance says shall, not implies that you do it. It says you do it.
What, excuse, I'm sorry, what?
First page.
First page of my letter?
Section 608 of the zoning ordinance implies that an outdoor storage facility contractor's yard is typically considered an accessory use.
Yeah,
The ordinance reads shall.
yeah, I apologize if there's any confusion there. Actually, when Mr. Wernes first looked at this piece of property to purchase and to use for this purpose, obviously he spoke with the planning department and discussed the project to not only know if, number one, if the use is, this is before I was involved, not only to know if this use is allowable in the district, but if it is allowable, what are the steps he needs to take and what is the time frame? Because he had a certain window of time with his purchase agreement with the property owner before he needed to make a decision on the purchase. And initially it was our understanding that it was a planning commission meeting. We had no idea we had to come here until 2 days before the planning commission meeting, unfortunately. So, hence there was a little bit of confusion. Initially, we didn't, there was kind of an implication, we thought there was like an implication in that section that we needed a building, but when we questioned it, it was more or less determined initially, again, that the primary use is the accessory use is what he's proposing to use. So there was no primary use. So there was a little bit of confusion in the beginning there. So that's hence the little bit of a, maybe.
My other question is, who is the owner, or does the owner of the property own any of the abutting properties?
No.
Was it leased to somebody that was in the abutting properties up until recently?
To our knowledge, I don't believe
For the construction equipment that was there?
I don't believe so, no. To our knowledge, it was, did he actually, the previous owner own the property? Or they were,
The previous owner was a trust, a Jim Cawley Trust. He owned the property, he operated. His purpose of the property was he kept trucks there. He had a contract with the Postal Service.
Yeah.
So he would run a tractor trailer to the Postal Service, pick up mail, and do the inner transportation. Post office moved, and then he had to move. From there, I don't know exactly what he did with the, as far as leasing it or what. I know that, like, there was a picture, there was a couple cars that were in the parking lot. There are actually people that work around there that just park their cars there to, probably just because they want to park their cars without being around other cars. To be clear too, we already do own the property. We closed on it 2 weeks ago, right after that site.
Okay, you have closed on it.
We closed the property.
Okay. Then my other question is, when your people come in, are they going to park on this property?
Correct.
And their job is mowing lawns, basically?
Yeah, landscape work. It's basically, their employees are going to come in, trucks are going to leave. They're going to come in at night, and then the cars are going to leave. So when the trucks are gone, the cars are there. When the cars are there, the trucks are gone. Pretty much how it's set up.
And, sorry, I want to add to that, and also, because the parking issue came up at the, or was commented on at the initial planning commission meeting. It must be realized as well that, these trucks obviously seat 3 people, and so you're not having 3 vehicles arrive and 1 vehicle leaving. It's actually the opposite. You're going to have 1 vehicle, like a van, arriving with 10 or 12 people, and you're going to have 3 or 4 vehicles leaving. So there's no, we're not going to be short on parking, essentially. We're going to have enough parking for the trucks and trailers that he's going to need, and as the vehicles arrive to drop off the people and get in the vehicles and disperse, it's not like we're going to have an overabundance of employee vehicles. So I want to make sure that's clear as well.
Mr. Bloomingdale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How many trucks are you running, roughly?
Well,
And even in a follow-on question in the same line is, how many do you anticipate parking here at any given time?
a maximum, I think we listed out 14 or 15 at a maximum. And of course, we're not going to start there with 14 or 15, but that would be having the property pretty much maxed out as far as movement. We're a growing landscape company. We have many locations. We're a large-scale landscape company. We're clean, we're neat, we're good to the community, we give back to the community. There's more things that we want to do within the city of Troy. A start here and then moving into something bigger inside of the city of Troy is I would assume is what will end up happening down the road, amongst other things that we're going to look to possibly do with, retail facility and stuff like that, because we'd also do retail, landscape goods and stuff like that, So I wouldn't assume this is going to support us for 30 years. I would assume that, we'll have a couple different, spots that we'll end up operating out of.
Thank you.
If I could add something too, if you don't mind. There was a comment about the building and needing an office. Believe it or not, we have a main office in Washington Township. Loads of our administration is paperless. So it's all on devices and stuff like that. So believe it or not, an office is not necessary here because we do have an office staff that's housed in a complex that handles all the administration for all of our locations.
Thank you. So I do have a question. I think I have 2 questions. I would say, I was reading the material, and I did drive by the property today, which you're my close neighbors. I'm about a mile door to door, or actually less than a mile from your parcel. So I stopped on the way over here. And regarding your letter, sir, about the fencing, and I understand that the Planning Commission would be involved in working out those details, but what would your plan be regarding that front fencing? I noticed at the back there was no fence like you disclosed, it's just the poles there. But the front one, is that a concrete fence of some sort? It looks concrete coloring. Would that would be changed out or removed or screened kind of in front of? Could you explain to me that a little bit?
Well, basically, we're willing to do the 8-foot fence. We're willing to do what it takes to make everything work. We haven't measured that front wall. It's actually a cinder block wall.
Okay.
If that has to come down and we need to put an 8-foot fence with the wire on and stuff like that, we will do that. There is a gate in the front that has to be replaced already on that on the end of that wall. But we will do whatever it takes to make sure that there's a 8-foot all the way around. If we have to put block on top of what's there, or if we were to remove that and put more fencing in.
Thank you. Yeah, my quick impression was if there's anything that would go in here besides this concrete fence or wall, whatever it was, it would be definite improvement. It's not that it's just so bland, and I can't say that it's ugly. It doesn't enhance that particular subdivision. And it really truly is a subdivision, because if you know that area, it's not just commercial buildings in there. There are residential homes, not necessarily on that street. I'm not sure if there are, but in the surrounding streets, there's an occasional small home that probably pre-existed that subdivision. So that's good to hear. And then I noticed in the letter, you talked about improving the landscape, and also I noticed that the bushes that were there were, I don't know if they just needed to be tended to better. It looks like they were a quarter dead or roughly thereabouts, and then there were some rocks, or, large rocks. And knowing full well that you're a landscaping firm, and you don't just cut grasses, you install beautiful things and so forth, I imagine that would be an improvement to the neighborhood as well. Do you want to just touch on that?
Absolutely. The landscape is going to be clean. We are adding street trees to the front. I believe 2 trees is what we're putting in. It's going to be neat. I welcome anybody to take a ride by our Washington Township facility, right on Van Dyke when you're heading out to Romeo. It's absolutely, it's gorgeous. We take so much pride in what we do. We really do. And, like I've talked to the neighbors, and, we've discussed what we're looking to do here and stuff like that. We're going to be good neighbors. It's going to be clean. We're going to keep it up. We're going to be good. We're going to be good there for that. We're going to be good neighbors, for sure.
I'm a little familiar with your company because I'm from, a long time ago, Washington Township.
Okay.
So, and I know you have a good reputation. How many total employees does your company have? I know that they wouldn't be all using this parcel if this is approved, but how large is your company?
Overall, we have about 300 employees. We operate southern Michigan, Midland south to the border from Lake Michigan across to Lake Huron, northern Illinois, and southern Florida.
Okay.
We have approximately 10 different locations in total.
Very good. Mr. Courtney?
Yeah, how many of these people are going to be just for lawn mowing?
This site right here is primarily maintenance crews.
Which is lawn mowing?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, basically
Snow
lawn
and
mowing
snow
or-
plowing?
Excuse me?
And snow plowing?
Correct.
Okay, and your salt is going to be stored where it's hit by the weather?
Excuse me?
Where the weather comes in, the rain hits the snow, hits the salt?
Will it be covered, you're saying?
Yeah, the rain is going to hit it or not?
Salt that's stored?
Yep.
Absolutely not. We will keep it tarped and all that kind of stuff.
And none of the guys ever need a John on their way in or on their way out?
Everything that we do, it's transient. When people come in, they're immediately leaving, and they're on the road between stops all day. They're able to make stops whenever, necessary.
Mr. Krent?
Just one quick question. In the outline provided by the planning consultant, on number 4, he's defining, he says, the rationale behind requiring a building, got my glasses on, requiring a building on site is sound. And then he goes on to say, if a site is intended to be used by a contractor for staging, employee assignments, employee parking, customer service, et cetera, an office is needed for business activity to be conducted. Do you conduct any business at this site? Will you be conducting any business?
As far as customers coming in and visiting or something like that? Very rarely. For example, if we provide pricing to the city of Troy to work on some of the municipal grounds, if they were looking to award the work to us, they would come and they would check out our facilities. But generally, it's not like we're going to invite customers to come meet our account managers on this site. Generally, we do that in the field, in customers' offices. We invite them to our Washington Township location, but we won't have invitations for customers to come and visit us at this site.
So basically, this is just storage and parking?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Correct.
And I think, Mr. Krent, if I'm not incorrect, the gentleman could speak to it. I seem to have seen some verbiage in your letter to that point. I think you said something about there wouldn't be any retail business or...
Correct.
And that's how I interpreted it too, just as you did too.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
That was good to clarify.
We do have a retail facility in Washington Township, and that's something that You know, we're going to look to expand, you know, in the future, but that won't have any impact here.
Of course, Troy would welcome you to look here first, so
Yeah,
we need more business.
you know, it's really, we have great interest, that's for sure.
Mr. Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the main issues we have to look at in granting the variance is the practical difficulty with the site and essentially the hardship you're meeting. And based upon your comments, and correct me if I'm wrong, the big hardship you're dealing with here is the fact that it's a small piece of property, and to build a contractor's office on the site would be uneconomical for you? Is that essentially the difficulty?
A couple different things. It would be definitely not economical because we don't have a need for it. But secondly, it would deter us from being able to use a site at all. You know, that was the biggest concern when we got that letter right before the planning meeting. If there's a building there, we can't operate there, you know, just because it is so confined, you know, so small. And if you see there, that circle, and there's actually the turning radius for the vehicles to pull in and turn around, and it's pretty well maxed out to, you know, make that turn. So you need space there just for that.
And that goes back to one of my original comments in terms of having a building there. I mean, it's not so much, part of it's the building itself, obviously, because it takes up space, but it's everything that goes along with having a permanent structure, the parking lot, the sidewalks, the barrier-free access, and the landscaping requirements. You have to have landscape, parking lot trees and open space, and it's just, you keep adding to the list, and yeah, there's economics involved, obviously, but primarily, though, it's just, that line just keeps moving back, and pretty much that you're just losing too much land area.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the board right now? See, no, Mr. Courtney.
Just one other question. Do you have any other location besides the township office?
The Washington Township?
Yeah.
We have a location on the city of Lansing. We have a location in Westland.
Okay, are those like this, or are they like the other with the building?
You know, the city of Lansing is a lot. Believe it or not, we lease property from the city of Lansing inside of a park that's fenced in. In Westland, we do have a facility with a building, which is it's more of another kind of main hub. There's a lot of activity that happens out of there. Chicago, for example, we have a couple locations in Chicago. One has a building, one doesn't. You know, it's a transient yard. We operate a transient yard in Romulus at Metro Airport. You know, similar kind of thing where, you know, there's a couple trucks are stationed. It's a transient thing. Guys come in, park, get in the vehicles, and leave, and they're off to the grounds of the airport, and then, you know, other things that are local. And we have another spot in Flint as well. That's the same kind of thing. It's just transient, very small.
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen can have a seat when the board will consider the matter.
Thank you.
Mr. Krent.
Well, first of all, I wanted to compliment the applicant. I think your presentation was very comprehensive, very complete.
Mr. Chair?
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Grant, but we do need to have a public hearing.
I apologize.
Oh, forgot that little part.
I might be presiding as the chairman tonight. I'm a former chairman of this, and this is the first time I've sat in the chairman's seat in quite a few years, I think. So I apologize to Mr. Krent. So at this point in time, we are going to have a public hearing on this matter. And if any member of the public would like to make a comment to the board before consideration, now is the time. So I know there are several people in the audience. If someone would like to come forward and speak, please come to the podium now. I'll open the public hearing, and seeing no one from the public to speak, I will close the public hearing and bring the matter back to the board. So Mr. Krent, please proceed.
Yeah, I just want, like I say, starting off, I'd really like to compliment the applicant. That was a really good presentation. It was very thorough, had a lot of good information, photographs, the plan views, everything showed, and I had no problem figuring out what your situation was from the materials you presented. Second of all, I find that you meet all 5 of the requirements for getting a variance. Especially, again, it's a dimensional thing. Your lot size being so narrow precludes, if you added all those things that are required to have a building there, you're going to probably use up 1/3 of the land just for those requirements, and then you lose that ability to utilize that land for business. And being that the neighboring businesses on all sides and all views are industrial in nature, I don't see anything in there that would negatively impact any of the surrounding businesses or property owners. And third, let's see what I said here. Well, yeah, the planned improvements, I appreciate that. The improvements you're making to the land will help that whole area, and I think any landowner that decides to improve their property image-wise is a benefit to Troy, and I see no reason not to grant. I see no reason not to grant this variance. As a matter of fact, I would vote to approve this variance.
Thank you, Mr. Krent. Mr. Lambert, did you have something?
I had a question for staff, but if anybody else wanted to go first.
Please proceed.
Okay. Earlier, Mr. Krent asked, what kind of a variance is this? And can you clarify again exactly what kind of variance we're looking at here? For those of us who are more laymen, don't understand the nuances, explain to me in particular what would be the grounds for a practical difficulty with this type of a variance?
You would apply the same standards as any dimensional variance, the 5 criteria set forth in the ordinance. It was actually a very lengthy meeting that we had to discuss whether this was a use variance or a dimensional variance, and we ultimately determined that it was a non-use variance because they're not asking for a use that's prohibited. A contractor's yard is a use that's allowed in the IB zoning. And ultimately, that's how we came to our conclusion, that they're not asking for a use that's not permitted. The use that they're asking for is permitted, but they cannot get special use approval unless they have a building. So if this variance is denied, they can't even go to this planning commission for special use approval. If the variance is granted, then the planning commission could still deny special use approval, but they can at least consider it if the variance is granted. But anyway, it's just like any dimensional variance, the 5 criteria that were addressed earlier.
The reason I'm asking that is I'm having some heartburn over this. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I agree with Mr. Krent that I'm sure it would be an improvement to that location for everything they plan on doing there. But the Planning Commission and the City Council just 2 years ago inserted this specific language requiring a building on this type of a site, and I just don't understand how we can essentially say that doesn't apply in this situation. So I guess that's where I'm concerned about. And
it's a substantial variance. Sometimes people ask for setback variances of 3 feet, or for instance, and you would normally say that's a minor variance. If they ask for a 300-foot setback variance, then that would be a substantial variance. Asking to be excused from inserting a building is a it's a substantial variance, so that should go into your considerations, no question about it.
okay, thank you.
And I think I would say on that point is, if we're looking at, what other thing could this petitioner do with the parcel? Well, yes, they could develop it and go through that process. And my guess is, since we are the zoning board, that we would actually be requested by the petitioner for a number of large variances to build a parcel that would work for their business model and so forth. So it's really kind of, it's a glass half empty or half full here. And as we know on the zoning board, we've seen many variance requests for large setbacks because there's no practical use for the parcel unless those variances are granted and for a building to go in. So those are my thoughts. I also think that, driving by it today, and I pulled into the parking lot as well, I guess this one member of the board is always concerned about how it would potentially, a variance request would negatively impact the neighbor's parcel. And I know that in the law, it says that we can't approve anything that would negatively impact anyone else. Well, here, it looks either really truly would look like an overflow lot of one of those surrounding businesses. That's what I thought when I looked at the pictures before I drove by. I'm like, well, this just seems like it would go with that building or with the building on the other side after having visited it, for sure. And I think to Mr. Kren's point, not that we can approve simply because a petitioner mentions that they want to make improvements. I think that plus the fact that the improvements will be there, I don't see there's really any negative way of looking at it. And I do know that a number of people have been in the community have been talking about recently looking at a longer range view of our zoning, and I'm sure they would have to go through council and so forth, but, you know, where does Troy go in the next, you know, decade and in the next century? In retail, I mean, office is way down, industrial buildings are even further down. So this might be something that I think that the council would need to address. Maybe Mr. Evans has some comments related to that in the future, but this may be a model that that is necessary to keep Troy vibrant in the future. So I'm really kind of, you know, very interested in what they've presented. I thought the dialogue they had via their letter was very helpful in their presentation tonight as well. So I'm inclined to vote in favor of it. Mr. Courtney?
Yes, I have a problem with the fact that they want to get a variance from the building. If I needed a variance from the building, I wouldn't go look at a parcel that was too small. And they just went out and purchased a parcel that was apparently too small, although I think they could stick a small building in there without doing too much interference. A 15 by 20 or a 15 by 15, and it wouldn't take that much space, but I have problems giving a variance on something that the council just stuck in the ordinance.
Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Evans, maybe you could address the fact about, you know, if a building would go in there, what kind of, not knowing what the plan would be by the owners, but what variances would perhaps be presented for such a small parcel. That's kind of stabbing into the thin air, I know, but you're pretty good at it, so.
That's pretty speculative. I
Yes.
can say that this zoning district is one of the most flexible within our zoning ordinance. As a matter of fact, I believe every use except standalone, single-family housing is in one way, shape, or form permitted in the IB district. So to perhaps try to identify what variances could be required, well, we've got just about any use is allowed here. So I don't think it would be fair to go beyond that. Be a pretty big answer if somebody tried to do a study.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bloomingdale?
Mr. Chairman, in evaluating the information that we've been given, both in print and verbally here, it just makes sense to me. This piece of property has been used as a parking lot for as long as I've lived in the city. It's in an area where that's permissible. I completely understand their difficulty in moving equipment around something that's long and that narrow. You're going to take cars in and park them. My impression is that there's a crew leader that is going to take a truck out, and possibly 2 or 3 team members in that thing that will follow him in their vehicles or ride with the truck, either way. But the fact that it's been used as a parking lot, the fact that as far as I'm concerned, they do have a dimensional variance, and my interpretation is this: you can't swing equipment in a narrow space like that. So to put an obstruction in the middle of that then sort of defeats the purpose. I'm very inclined to support their petition.
Thank you. Anyone else? Or is there a motion to be made by any member of the board?
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve. Should I list the reasons?
I believe we do. And Mr. Kren,
You could adopt the reasons you set forth on the record.
Okay, that's fine. I adopt the reasons I previously mentioned.
Mr.
I'll second that.
Makes a motion, Mr. Bloomingdale seconds. Is there any discussion on the motion? Did you have something, sir?
Well, we got an opportunity over here to put in use a property that's worthless. You can't get anything out of there. Even if you're forced to put a building, what are you going to do with the building? It has no use. The only thing I'm concerned is You know, you're going to store his equipment over there, and you're going to have a security problem. You know, unless you guys address them with some kind of cameras, or because then you're going to come to the city, you know, the police, and it's a situation that might create problems. But other than that, I have no objections.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Hearing none, Mr. Evans, I believe we're ready for a vote.
Mr. Courtney,
No.
Mr. Kaltsunis,
Yes.
Mr. Krent,
Yes.
Mr. Lambert,
No.
Mr. Bloomingdale,
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes. Motion passes. The petitioners, you have your variance. Congratulations. Thank you for coming.
Welcome to the city.
And the next item is simple communication. I think this is just a reminder from Mr. Evans that the next meeting in May, which is our annual board election of chairman and vice chairman separately, will be held, and it's a one-year term. So people can fire up the printing presses for their mailers and so forth, and we'll see what happens in a month from now. And then I see item 6 is miscellaneous business discussion regarding proposal change to the ZBA application. I know Mr. Neal was spearheading that, and I don't know if this is something, Mr. Evans, that we should postpone until next month, or are you prepared to address this tonight?
Well, sure. Just briefly, if I could, at our last meeting, one of the things that was brought up was if we could get the practical difficulty criteria more front and center for the applicants as part of the application. So briefly, I'd just like to summarize what changes we've made. What you have on the overhead now is the draft application, and what I've done is on page 3, the first paragraph, I rewrote statement of practical difficulty to clearly enumerate for the person to say, essentially, you need to do everything possible you can in your application to demonstrate to this board that you meet as many of the 5 criteria as you possibly can in any way, shape, or form. And that portion was rewritten, and I've also moved that to page 3 of the application as opposed to the end of the application where it's at now. And then our checklist, I rewrote on page 4, and the second item is a statement of practical difficulty from page 3. So those are the 2 changes we made to try to bring the practical difficulty criteria front and center for anyone looking at the application.
Thank you. Any questions on that? I would like to say that I think that's helpful, but I know that the standard operating procedure is you don't just throw paperwork at someone who walks into your office. You sit them down, you have a meeting, and you discuss all this. So my guess is, since that would be potentially on the application, they're fully briefed at, you know, what the implications are and what the requirements are by you at the time anyway. But so it probably is a easier way to walk them through the process, is my guess. Would that be correct, potentially?
Well, there's no question that I like to meet with applicants in advance of someone even preparing an application to give them an idea of perhaps some questions or considerations that they need to think about. The last thing I need is an applicant to be surprised when they get questions from this board to clarify, when they can hear it from me. Now, granted, we're a board of 7 people, and there's no way that anyone can anticipate any potential question from a board, but we can understand from our training and from what the ordinance requires that there's clearly some basic tenets, and quite honestly, not everybody who walks into my office has experience going before zoning boards. Many times they're residents that have never been before a public body in their life. So it works well for everyone, not only the applicant, but city staff, as well as this board, to move things along smoothly and give everyone the best understanding we can, knowing that the variables for each matter could be substantially different.
Okay. Anyone else related to the application? Any comments? Mr. Courtney?
I looked at the 2, the current and the proposed, and I think it's a big improvement.
Amen.
Just reading it,
Seems like it for
easier
sure.
reading.
Yes. Mr. Bloomingdale?
Unless I'm missing a page, we skipped from 5 to 8 from page 1 to page 2. Is there Am I missing a page?
Yeah, I see the same
Seven's
thing.
up there. 6 is here.
Okay, I'm missing a page then. All right.
Oh, here.
Okay, not,
This is the existing. You're talking about the current?
no, the new one.
The new one? Maybe I read.
Well, I can tell you the new one is also 4 pages.
4 pages, so I only got 3, and
Oh.
that's.
I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 8.
Oh, no.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You're right. Number 8 should be number 6. Yeah.
Maybe that's the,
The number 8 there should be 6.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay, on page,
I never noticed that.
yeah, and this is for the,
Mr. Chairman,
I was searching for
if
that
this
other
was
page
done in
for hours.
Word, that would be something that they have to go back and reformat, probably.
okay, yeah, that can be done, no problem.
That's just,
Yeah, that's a proofreading. We
Other
can
than
do
that, I agree.
Okay.
okay, so I think we're good with that.
All right, sounds good.
That doesn't require any action by
No,
us tonight, correct?
not at all.
Okay. And then the next item is number 7, which is public comment. If we have anyone from the public who wishes to talk about operations of this board, or perhaps anything else they want to talk about, now is the time. I'll call that portion open. Seeing no one wanting to make a comment from the general public, I will close that portion out. Any other comments from the board before we adjourn? Yes, Mr. Bloomingdale.
On November 11th, Rusty and I attended the meeting, and we were not listed in the attendees. And I've tried to get that into the correction of that minutes, but with the meetings canceled, et cetera, why we're this far back. But I would appreciate having those minutes amended to include Rusty and I as being in
what
attendance.
what minutes?
November minutes,
November 30th?
yeah. December was canceled.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a copy of that.
I got a copy.
Mr. Evans, do you want to address that?
Well,
Mr. Monsi? Monsi?
I never noticed that before either.
If I may, Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Monsi.
there could be a problem because the Open Meetings Act requires the minutes to be corrected at the next meeting.
Yeah.
So, but there may be a way around it. I don't know right off the bat, but I can check into it at the next meeting.
Okay.
I mean, I would opine that anyone watching the video knows that they're here. But we can certainly, we'll do what we can to get them in the minutes. It is accurate. It's
I
correct.
wouldn't go through a lot. I thought by a simple request we could do that, but if anybody really gets interested, they can watch the videotapes, and Rusty will raise his hand. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure that there's huge viewership on the city website for our previous archive meetings of this board, but we know you were there. I think perhaps maybe there was just a
You can make
Glitch.
a note of
It was a typo, yeah.
glitch because when the alternate isn't seated, they're not, so we've addressed that before, but duly noted. Okay, seeing no other public comment at this time, I believe that we can stand adjourned. Mr. Evans, do you have anything else?
Nothing else.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a good night.